Since the series' conception back in the days of the Famicom, Fire Emblem was traditionally exclusive to Nintendo home consoles, with the first 5 entries of the series appearing on the Famicom and later the Super Famicom. The series then found a new home on the Game Boy Advance, with 3 different games appearing on the handheld, 2 of which I've already covered. In part 2 of the retrospective, I stated that the Sacred Stones felt and was rushed out, only having been in development for about a year. Both the Sacred Stones and the next home console entry were being developed simultaneously, but this console game spent a great deal more time in development. This next console entry is none other than Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, which you may have guessed by the title of this video. Path of Radiance is the 3rd game of the series to be released in North America and is the 9th game of the series, releasing over here in late 2005 on the Nintendo GameCube. Like many other entries of the series, Path of Radiance takes place on an entirely different location than previous games, with another new cast of characters. However, unlike pretty much every other game of the series, the game's story does not begin with a summary of the history of the continent or retelling some ancient prophecy. Instead, we're treated to Fire Emblem's first ever CG cutscene, which shows our protagonist and fan-favorite Super Smash Bros. Character Ike sparring with his father, and promptly getting knocked out cold by his old man. After a brief tutorial, we find out that Ike is a new member of his father's mercenary company, the Grell Mercenaries. This makes Ike one of, if not the only main character in the entire series to be a commoner. You know, not some important noble or anyone attached to any royal house, which really adds a lot to his character in many surprising ways, making Ike one of the most relatable and likable characters in all of Fire Emblem. The continent in which the game takes place on, Tellius, is currently at war, with the kingdom of Dain declaring war on nearby kingdoms, one of which is Crimea, where the Grell Mercenaries are based out of. During one of Ike's first assignments as a mercenary, he comes across a platoon of Dain troops and is forced into battle, after which he discovers the Princess of Crimea and unknowingly involves himself into struggles and hardships of which he could never imagine. This game's series of prologue chapters consists largely of Ike's first few assignments in his father's mercenary troop. And later, after meeting Princess Elincia, the prologue concludes with the Grell Mercenaries escorting her to the Kingdom of Gallia, a nation consisting entirely of shapeshifters, which introduces one of Path of Radiance's newest additions to the series formula, the Lagoos. You see, Tellius is divided between 2 species, normal-looking humans called the Bjork, and the shape-shifting Lagoos, who are divided into various kingdoms and tribes, like the Beast Kingdom of Gallia or the Raven Kingdom of Kilvis. As well, each tribe's human form contains characteristics of their animal transformations, like the various bird tribes having wings or the beastmen having tails and furry ears. These various distinctions between the Bjork and the Lagoos are the cause of a lot of racism and discrimination within the game's story, which serves as a crucial and effective plot point that is predominant throughout the game. In actual gameplay, the Lagoos and the Bjork play very differently, but we'll get to that later. Back to the story summary. After successfully seeing the princess brought safely to Gallia despite several attacks from Dain troops, the Grell Mercenaries are due for some R&R, but in the middle of the night, Ike's father, Grell, is seen by Ike leaving their base. Ike follows him and witnesses a duel between his father and the legendary Black Knight, Dain's greatest general and quite possibly the most powerful swordsman in all of Tellius. And let me tell you, the Black Knight is probably the coolest villain in all of this series. Scratch that, in any RPG. Don't let the generic name fool you. This guy is badass. Seriously, between his incredibly intimidating theme that plays whenever he takes to the field, or his ridiculous stats, and all the awesome stuff he does throughout the game, seriously, he is awesome. Best of all, you don't even learn his identity. Well, not in this game at least. Anyway. In the end, the Black Knight fells Grell and spares Ike, after which Ike swears revenge on the Black Knight. The story evolves much further from here, but I'll end the plot synopsis here to leave some surprises, as the story becomes increasingly interesting as you progress through each chapter. The overall story of Path of Radiance succeeds due to the fact that more than any other game in the series is that Tellius is a world of moral gray, with very few examples of absolute good and evil. This is shown throughout the game as you end up exploring and fighting in almost every region of Tellius, and against a wide array of opponents who have different and sometimes complex reasons for fighting. And like Fire Emblem on the Game Boy Advance, Path of Radiance tells most of its powerful moments through gameplay, making for an incredibly engrossing single-player experience. I mentioned that the beginning of the game doesn't drop any text bombs telling you about the ancient history of Tellius. Instead, you gradually learn of it over the course of the game, which is a much more interesting method of storytelling versus the traditional text dumps at the beginning of each game. However, what makes Path of Radiance story and the world stand out amongst the other entries in the Fire Emblem series is, as you may have guessed, the characters. Once again, the game's cast is another lovable group that you will want to do everything in your power to keep alive. The reason why I feel the characters stand out more than before is that the game gives you even more opportunities to learn about them. Outside of the support conversations and their initial recruitment speech, you can also see other minor conversations between characters in the base menu called Info. Usually these info sections will usually give you hints for upcoming chapters and battles. However, there are a variety of info conversations that actually develop the characters further, with each character having multiple they are featured in. For instance, every time you recruit a new character, the next chapter will have an info conversation where Ike will have a chat with them about fighting together, making Ike seem like a much more personable leader than previous protagonists. As well, these conversations often further flesh out these characters' personalities. So, suffice to say, this game offers many opportunities to develop its characters more than any other game in the series. But having said that, it's not all perfect. I mentioned the base menu earlier. Before each chapter really begins, you have this menu which allows you to manage your army. You can buy a variety of items, forge your own weapons, which is a new feature. As well, you can manage your troops' personal relationships, aka support conversations. Supports work very similar to how they have in previous games, but instead of these conversations taking place directly on the battlefield, they take place outside of battle, in your base. This isn't really a bad change, but it feels unnecessary, and it kind of makes the overall support system feel clunky, as you don't immediately see the results of unit placement affecting your troops' individual relationships until after each battle, making it kinda harder to track. Despite that minor complaint, the characters get more development than characters of past titles, and once again, the cast is a great blend of personalities, and everyone has their moment in some way or another. So both the story and the band of characters you will lead to an excellent job in standing out amongst a series that is known for telling great stories and having incredible characters. Now, with all that said, it's high time we talked about the gameplay. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance plays like practically every other entry in the series, which isn't really that much of a shocker. But what surprises me every time I replay this game is how refined and tight the game plays. Path of Radiance is arguably the most polished entry in a series that already has absurd amount of polish. To explain in short, practically every existing convention of a Fire Emblem game is here. The weapons triangle, a slightly altered but similar magic triangle, character unit promotion, support conversations, weapon and item management, etc. Now before anyone says anything, Path of Radiance avoids the pitfalls of a sequel like the Sacred Stones by actually adding new features or improving existing ones. A couple of these new features in Path of Radiance are some of the best in the series, and some of the most pointless. An example of a trivial addition is the shove system. On the field map, when two units are adjacent to one another, you have the option to shove the other unit. This command is pretty self-explanatory, as all it does is, well, shove the other unit to another space. Some units can be shoved further depending on the difference between their weight. Ultimately, in all of my playthroughs of this game, I've never really found a use for this command. More substantial additions would include the ability to freely see the attack and movement range of enemies, which is incredibly useful. Another interesting feature is the whole base menu, which occurs between battles and allows players to freely manage their army's weapons, items, and even skills and experience. Each unit can learn various skills, like being able to attack additionally, improve critical hit rates, negate damage, or even pull off a special attack like Ike's famous Aether. As well, after completing each battle, you will earn an amount of bonus experience that can be freely spent on leveling up your units in between battles. This system is an excellent addition that avoids the EXP abuse of the Sacred Stones' world map, but still allows players an opportunity to level up weaker units or improve existing ones. This is easily one of my favorite features. The base menu also has the support conversations and info options, but we've already been over that. Fire Emblem's jump to 3D has also led to some changes, most notably of which being bigger battlefields, which is in turn matched by units being able to move farther, making battles seem faster paced and have more going on despite being more spacious than the GBA entries. Some other shakeups to tradition are how each unit's inventory works. In the Game Boy Advance Fire Emblems, each unit can only carry a total of 5 objects, whether or not they be weapons or items. In Path of Radiance, each unit can carry up to 4 weapons and 4 items, and once again, this is a change as one I feel is for the better. Quite possibly the biggest change in the gameplay department is the new unit types, the Lagoos. Over the course of the game, you'll have access to a variety of different Lagoos, from the Beast Tribe, Hawk Tribe, and even the Dragon Tribe. Each have their own weaknesses and strengths, much like regular units. Each Lagoo's unit has a bar that will either increase when in their human form until it is full, in which they will transform to their animal form, or if they're already in their animal form, the bar will decrease until it reaches 0, in which they revert to their human form. When in animal form, these units receive substantial stat buffs and can easily overpower normal units, but because of the limit on their transformations, they aren't overpowered and overall still feel balanced. So there is both enough familiar gameplay concepts and new ones to make Path to Radiance a great installment by keeping what works and trying out some new things, or in most cases, pre-existing gameplay concepts that were used in many of the Japanese exclusive games. So at the time, things like the skill system and the base management system were a first for gamers outside of Japan. Ultimately, Fire Emblem Path of Radiance is arguably the most polished game in the series and is easily one of the best playing turn-based strategy games ever. It brings enough new conventions to the pre-established Fire Emblem formula while refining existing ones, making for a great gameplay experience. But like every game series that goes 3D, the biggest change is the graphics. Being the first 3D Fire Emblem, Path of Radiance looks radically different than its predecessors. The battle map and battle animations are all now fully 3D. For a title that released in 2005, the game looks really average. The battle map features decently detailed units and backgrounds, whereas the battle animations feature much more detailed character models. The game isn't ugly, but it looks outdated when compared to its contemporaries. My biggest problems with this new visual style is how unexciting battle missions are to watch when compared to the Game Boy Advance games, which featured stylish, over-the-top attacks, whereas here everything is toned down to appear more realistic, and because of that I often end up turning off battle animations in favor of watching the field map animations, which makes battles much faster paced and are more detailed than they have ever been, so that's a plus. My next complaint with the graphics is how most units are clones of one another with very few distinct looking characters. Ike, for example, is heavily detailed and is one of a kind. Most mounted and armored units all look nearly exactly the same, save for a few different colors and maybe having slightly longer hair. This has been in every Fire Emblem game, but previous entries have way more distinct looking units. So I was disappointed with the lack of character distinction. One thing that hasn't changed that much is the character portraits used for the majority of the game's cutscenes. They are very similar to the cutscenes seen in most Fire Emblem games, but this time they feature mid to full body shots, which look great, being much more detailed than the talking heads of previous games. Like I mentioned much earlier, there are also some CG cutscenes used for very important scenes within the story. These CG cutscenes, few as they are, look pretty good. They aren't as good looking as, say, some Square Enix pre-rendered cutscenes you would see in a Final Fantasy title or even Kingdom Hearts, but they are stylish and good enough that they are entertaining to watch and have aged fairly well. One thing that has not aged very well is the game's voice acting, which is thankfully limited to only being used in the CG cutscenes, which is...
Oh no!
Yeah, oh no indeed. I thought most characters sound off, and it really doesn't seem like all that much effort was put into this very limited voice work. Although, I do kinda like Grell's voice actor. It's funny though, at its time of release, Path of Radiance received a fair amount of criticism from various publications and review sites for not featuring voice acting during its regular cutscenes. I'd wholeheartedly disagree with this notion, seeing as how what we hear in the CG cutscenes isn't all that promising. On the other side of the sound spectrum, Path of Radiance features the first ever fully orchestrated Fire Emblem soundtrack, which as you may guess sounds absolutely incredible, with some really powerful and moving pieces. I suppose it's no surprise my favorite track from the game is none other than the theme of the Black Knight. Well, it's easy to see why so many people claim Path of Radiance is the best game in the Fire Emblem series. It has an incredibly engrossing story that is both well told and memorable. On top of that, the game has another standout cast of characters that players will easily grow attached to. Also, Path of Radiance plays incredibly well too, which I've said more than enough times in this review. Aside with my complaints of the visuals and some minor changes, I don't really have much to disagree with for such a statement, so I'll just say that Fire Emblem Path of Radiance is easily one of my favorite entries in the series and is a must-play game for fans of the series or fans of the genre. Having said that, the biggest hurdle of entry is the game's price, which has skyrocketed in recent years. The average online price for this game is around $70 on a good day, and honestly, it's hard to recommend this game for that price despite how good it is, but I will say that this game is worth hunting for. So go out there and hopefully you can find yourself a copy of this game in the wild for a much fairer price. So that about wraps things up for this review. Stay tuned for part 4 of the retrospective, in which I'll be reviewing this game's direct sequel, Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn for the Nintendo Wii. As always, it's been Darren of the Gaming Pilgrimage. Till next time. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this part of the retrospective. If you're curious to see what I did last time, you can always click on the video here to go back to the last part of the retrospective. Or if you really enjoyed the video, why not click that like button or even share it amongst your friends, as that would all really help out the channel. And if you want to stay tuned for the next part of the retrospective, click that subscribe button to find out more. Well, that's all for this time, so Darren out.